Hi everyone, hope you all doing well. Welcome back to our channel. In this video, I'm going to talk about installation and configuration of Azure Monitor Agent for Windows servers with the help of data collection rule. Now, if you're watching this series from the beginning, I assume you already know what is the purpose of a log analytics workspace, AMA and data collection rule, as well as there is one component that you must know, and that is Azure Arc enabled servers. Now, if at all you have any doubt in terms of these components, then you can just go to our channel and search for these two playlists, Azure Arc and Azure Monitor. And there are almost 11 different videos which are available that will give you enough information to get started with this particular video. Now let's talk about the core agenda of this video. In this video, we will see how to install Azure Monitor Agent on Windows servers, specifically not clients, only Windows servers, okay? Then what is a supported OS and network requirement? What are the roles required to install Azure Monitor Agent? How to configure a data collection rule for default data collection for Windows servers? Then where exactly a DCR is saved on the machine? Then which table is used for data ingestion in log analytics workspace, and how to check that data which is getting ingested, okay? Now, from supported OS perspective, this is the list which is currently supported, out of which I'm going to showcase you two different machines. The very first one is a Azure Arc enabled server, which is actually kind of on-prem machine that I have in my Hyper-V, and that is Windows Server 2022. And the other one is an Azure virtual machine itself, which is Windows Server 2016. Now, from network requirement, this is something which is exceptionally important. Since there are two components which are required, Azure Arc plus Azure Monitor. Okay, so in this case, you need to make sure the URLs for both the services are whitelisted for Azure Arc enabled servers specifically. The machines which exist in Azure will only need the URL whitelisting for Azure Monitor, whereas the machine which exists in your on-prem environment or in hybrid multi-cloud environments, they need the URL whitelisting for both of these components. Now, since Azure Arc network requirement is already covered in a different video altogether, this is the list of the endpoints which are used by Azure Monitor. But this is something which I highlight in all of my videos. Be practical, always refer to the network requirement article by Microsoft, because this is something which is changing, at a very higher pace. I mean, this is something which keeps on updating, right? Whether there is any new service or any new capability that comes. So this is the network requirement for Azure Monitor Agent, and this one is for Azure Arc. I will add both of these articles in the description. Please go ahead and review them while you are planning this for your environment, okay? Now, there are three different kinds of permissions which are required. The very first one is monitoring contributor, because this is something which will help you to create a data collection rule and create associations. Then you need virtual machine contributor, because this will help you to deploy the extension to Azure VM. Now, whenever Azure Monitor Agent is deployed, it is always deployed in the form of extensions when it comes to Windows servers, and this role is required for that particular operation, okay? Then you have Azure Connected Machine Resource Admin. I mean, this is again kind of a role which is more over related to Azure Arc. So make sure you have these three permissions, or a role which includes all the permissions which exist in these three roles, and make sure you have it either at the subscription level or the resource group level on which you will be applying all the changes, okay? Now, the next question is where exactly Azure Monitor Agent can be installed. It can be installed on Azure VMs, virtual machine scale sets, and any machine that exists anywhere, either in your on-prem environment, in GCP, or in Amazon, or in AWS, whatever you want to name it, with the help of Azure Arc enabled servers. Now, this is something which I've already covered in a lot more detail, but in a nutshell, the purpose of Azure Arc is to make sure that any machine that exists in these environments, they get onboarded to Azure as an Azure resource, okay? Now, to deploy Azure Monitor Agent from Azure portal, you have to create a data collection rule and then associate the resource with the data collection rule. Now, the moment you do this, Azure Monitor Agent will be installed automatically in the form of extensions, okay? So what does this mean? That the moment I'll associate these machines with my data collection rule, AMA will be installed on these machines by default. Okay. Now, the requirement for this particular video is to make sure that whenever Windows performance logs or Windows performance counters are getting captured, they must be ingested to a workspace named as performance monitoring. And then whenever Windows event logs, typical security logs, are getting captured, they must be ingested to a workspace named as Sentinel. So for this particular demo, I already have two workspaces. The very first one is performance monitoring and the other one is Sentinel. Again, the prerequisite is to make sure that you're applying this data collection rule to the VMs which are either in Azure or Azure Arc enabled servers. Now let's see how exactly everything is going to work. Okay, so there are two virtual machines that I have in this case. The very first one, which is Azure, the host name is Exchange, and this is Windows Server 2016. Okay, so this is my machine which exists in Azure, and as you can see, the host name is Exchange Server, and this machine is Windows Server 2016. Okay. Now the other machine that I have is Azure Arc enabled server. This is my on-prem machine, which is this one. And this has the host name PDC, as well as this is 2022. Okay. So these are two different machines altogether which exist. Okay. Now the next step is to go ahead and make sure that I create a data collection rule. Okay. And in that data collection rule, I will associate these two machines, which will result in the installation of AMA altogether. Okay. So now let me go to my browser and show you everything from scratch. Okay. So see, this is my Azure VM, which is Exchange Server. And as you can see, as of now, there is no extension that exists here by the name of Azure Monitor Agent. And this is my machine which exists in my on-prem environment. The name is PDC. It's an Azure Arc enabled server. Again, 2022 data center. And this also does not have any extension. This is the older one, but there is no extension for AMA. Okay. So now let's go ahead and search for data collection rules. Okay. Now I can click on create, and then I'll choose the respective set of options. Okay. So since I'm creating this for Windows, I'm going to name it as Windows DCR. Okay. And let's have some reference concepts work. Okay. I selected my subscription, and then I'm going to select my resource group. Let's say I'm going to select my resource group as Sentinel. Okay. Now then I'm going to select my location, which is Central India. Now, if you remember, while I was talking about data collection rule, I was very specifically talking about the reasons that why you choose dedicated options instead of this particular option. This will only be used when we talk about API data ingestion. Precisely. Okay. Now, since I'm talking about Windows, we are trying to onboard Windows servers. I'm not going to choose any data collection endpoint for now because it's typical performance monitoring log and Windows event logs that we want to capture. Okay. Now I have clicked on next, and here I'm getting the list of resource. Now there is one more thing which I would like to cover here, and that is, see, you can go ahead and create a data collection rule without associating them with a resource, which means that this association part where you scope a data collection rule to a specific machine can be done afterwards as well. It's fine. You can choose, you can either add the resource right now, or you can get the data collection rule created completely and then scope the machines. Okay. So I'll add it right away. So the very first machine that I have to add is my Exchange server itself, which is an Azure VM. Okay. Which is this one. Okay. Now the next thing is to add my machine, which is my Azure Arc enabled server, which is PDC, and which exists in this particular resource group, which is arc_windows_server. Now there is one more thing that I would like to show you guys here, and this is something which I have covered already when I was talking about data collection rule in terms of how exactly it happens, but here I'm giving you a reference point. This is my Azure AD, which is concepts work, but this Azure AD is being trusted by two different subscriptions. Okay, I'm creating my DCR in this particular subscription. However, I can scope my machine which exists in a different subscription altogether. So if you remember, when I was talking about data collection rule, I specifically brought this point that with the help of DCR, you can actually achieve a use case where your machine and your workspace can exist in a different subscriptions altogether. Okay, so right now I have scoped my machines, both the machines, and these machines will send data to different workspace altogether. Now, if you remember, this is something again which I have covered in my data collection rule video where I was talking about data sources. Okay, so the first requirement is to make sure I capture performance counters. Okay, and this is something which should be ingested to my workspace, which is performance monitoring, which is this one. Okay, so for this particular demo, I have already created two different workspaces altogether. And in this data collection rule, I am defining that if my machines, they try to send performance counter data, it should go to performance monitoring workspace. I'll click on add data source. Now I'll again click on add data source, and here I'm going to say that if Windows event logs are coming, and for this particular demo, let me just choose all these different categories. Okay, if Windows event logs are getting ingested, then they should be ingested to this particular workspace, which is Sentinel. And then again, I'm going to click on add data source. Now, if I talk about my requirement, what exactly I have done, I have created a data collection rule. I have scoped my machines with this particular data collection rule. And then I have defined what type of information has to be captured. That's it. Now I'm going to click on next, tags, and then I'm going to click on review and create. Now this will go ahead and create the data collection rule as well as the association of this data collection rule with these two resources, as well as the installation of AMA agent will also get started in the form of extensions. Okay, so what happens when you create this association? The next part is to go ahead and add these two data sources all together, and the moment you save data collection rule, these extensions will be deployed on these two machines all together. Okay, so let me come back to my portal again and see. Perfect. Now you can see my data collection rule is created, and if I'll go ahead and click on go to resource, you can see this is my data collection rule. It will show me the resources to which this particular data collection rule has been scoped. As you can see, these two are the one. And then you see this particular option of data sources. I mean, what exactly, what kind of information practically speaking that has to be captured. Okay. Now let's say if I go ahead and refresh these two tabs, which were showing me the extensions for both of my servers. So perfect. You can see for this particular machine, which is in Azure, the provisioning itself got succeeded in less than a minute. Okay. So this is my Azure extension for Azure Monitor. And as you can see, it has this particular name altogether, which is Azure Monitor.Windows Agent, and provisioning is succeeded for my Azure VM already. And here also it is succeeded. Okay, but I would suggest you to wait for at least 5 and 10 minutes at least, okay, to see the data ingestion. So what I will do is I will pause this video for 5 minutes, and then I'll bring back those machines and show you the data ingestion. Okay. Perfect. So it's been now more than 10 minutes. So let's go back to our portal and check whether we are getting all the data or not. Okay. So before I show you the data on the portal itself, let me show you a couple of things on the machines first. Okay. So this was my machine, which was the PDC one. I mean, this is the Azure Arc enabled servers. And as you can see, a new folder over here is created, which is resources. Okay. And this is exactly the folder where all the AMA configuration will be saved. Okay, now I will talk about this in a lot more detail when we'll talk about troubleshooting. As of now, if you're getting this folder created on the machine, which you have scoped for DCR, which means AMA installation has initiated. Now this packages folder, if you guys remember, I have discussed about this in a lot more detail when we were talking about Azure Arc. It's there in Azure Arc playlist. So packages folder is required for Azure Arc, and resources is the folder that will be available if the AMA installation has started. This was specifically Azure Arc enabled server. Now let me go back to my Azure VM and again go to my C drive and show you a small difference. Okay. Now you can see here it says packages. Okay. But there is no folder named as resource. Okay, because here it's a different location altogether where everything gets saved, and here the folder will be available inside Windows Azure, not the default C drive. Okay, again, so don't worry about this. I'm going to talk about this in a lot more detail when we'll talk about troubleshooting. Okay, so now let's come back to the browser and show you all the data. The easiest step to figure out whether the data ingestion is happening or not, okay, is to go to your machine. So in our case, this was the machine, and then go ahead and search for logs. Okay, and then just go here and type this particular command, which says search everything, and here you can just define a time frame. Okay, because then otherwise it is going to search every possible thing that is ingested to the log workspace. I mean, this option is kind of easy for you to figure out, but again, search operator is anyways not recommended in KQL. Okay, but again, long story cut short, if you see now that whether I'm getting data, all the data or not, so I can just summarize this count by the name of table. Okay, and let's see from this particular machine where exactly the data is getting ingested. So as you can see, there are 4 different tables which are used. Okay, the very first one is event, where all Windows events log will get ingested. Then you have typical Azure activity because it is an Azure resource. Then heartbeat is also sent by the machine to make sure that the health monitoring happens in a proper way. And then you have performance log in the perf table. And this same data will be available in terms of Exchange machine as well, which was my Azure VM. Okay, now here again I'll go ahead and summarize the count by table name, and you can see all the data will be shown here. Now, if you guys remember, there was a very specific point that I have covered in my last video, and that was, instead of using workspace ID and workspace key for authentication, Azure Monitor uses managed identity. Okay, but this managed identity is the identity which is created while the machine is getting onboarded to Azure Arc. Okay, so AMA typically uses the managed identity created while machine is getting onboarded to Azure Arc in terms of those machines which don't exist in Azure. Okay, now Azure Monitor Agent is deployed in the form of extensions. I've already shown you. One more very important aspect related to this is that this gives you the privilege to centrally manage all the Azure Monitor Agent clients, let's say from Azure portal itself. Likewise, installing, updating, or removing extensions. Okay, so let's say if I go to my machine here, and then if I go to extensions, if there is any update which has been released, I can just click on this and then I can click on update. If there is any, this button will get highlighted. Okay, or I can enable automatic upgrade, just giving you an example, or I can disable automatic upgrade. As of now, this button is grayed out because it is enabled already, or I can just go ahead and uninstall. Now imagine you can do this for all the machines that exist in your enterprise. Now there could be one more question, that if there are 1,000 machines, I have to go and do it manually. No, you have different methods. You can use APIs for that as well. Okay, so now let's talk about how exactly tables are used when it comes to data getting ingested. Okay, so the very first thing is whenever the Azure Monitor Agent is installed on a machine, the machine sends a heartbeat, which is recorded in heartbeat table of the log analytics workspace. And whenever a DCR is created to capture performance, or let's say Windows event logs, then the data is ingested in perf and event table of the workspace specifically. Okay, now let's talk about one more component which is moreover related to how AMA installation works on the machine. Okay, so basically folders that get created while the installation of Azure Monitor Agent is happening on the machine. Okay, so out of n number of different things which I will be covering when we will be talking about troubleshooting, there is one component that I would like to show you, and that is the location where exactly the DCR is saved on the machine. Okay, so this is that particular location, which is your resource, then AMA data store, then MCS and config chunk. Now see, this is something which I'm showing you on Azure VM. Okay, this naming convention will remain same, which is MCS config chunk. Okay, let me come back to my Azure Arc enabled server, which is this one, and show you that same information here also. Okay, so if I go to this particular folder, MCS config chunk, and as you can see, I'm getting a JSON file. This JSON file is basically your data collection tool. Okay, so this was all about knowing how exactly the AMA is installed on a Windows server, not the client one, only servers. Okay, and how you can get started with default data capture, default data ingestion for all the event logs or Windows performance logs. In the next video, I'm going to talk about how to create a DCR for custom log data ingestion. So if you think that this channel is helping you to learn anything new, please feel free to subscribe and share this video with your technical community. Thank you so much. Thanks for your time.